Check it out. Thursdays, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, noon Eastern. A healthy dose of Jersey Girl wisdom. Live with Rev Jersey Girl. Sponsored by New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network is on the rise. We're looking to grow with you. Do you have technical media experience or perhaps a desire to learn? Are you willing to volunteer your precious time and attention? We share this message to benefit all. If you possess a computer with a camera and a microphone, we will share our knowledge with you. Behind the scenes or being the star, let us bless our one. Contact us at info@ntmedia.org.
Hi, greetings, beloveds. How are you? So glad to have you back here on Jersey Girl Wisdom. I am Michelle Wadleigh, the Rev Jersey Girl, as you might have already known and been introduced to me. And today, my surroundings, I'm outdoors, so you might hear some sounds of nature, and all of that is good, and so very good. So today is as if you've been with me for a while, you know, you never know what I'm going to bring to you. Every week changes in conversation. My hope and dream, though, is that you find every week meaningful and meaty. And I have no doubt that this week, meaningful and meaty, is going to be what happens. Because today I have with me a very old friend. I've had her on the show already, and somebody who has been doing very organically, and I'll let her explain how that came about, very organically good anti-racism work. And then another is a colleague from Centers for Spiritual Living who has also been doing very powerful work in her community. She is extremely dedicated to the conversation around diversity inclusion. And she and I actually served together on the very first CSL Diversity Commission many years back. So both of these women are people I admire. They're strong women. And I like strong, confident women. Please welcome to the studio Rev Jude Denning and Reverend Dr. Georgia Prescott. Welcome there. Oh, you know, this is fun. I haven't often had more than one guest at a time, so it's great to have both of you together. And let's get the discomfort out of the way, as my good friend has reminded us that here you have three white women talking about anti-racism. And so I want to be clear, and I know these women are absolutely clear. The reason why we're doing this, because we're speaking to our audience, the white part of our audience, and by no means show up here as the answers to anything, just individuals who are passionate, active allies. And I think that's an important role. If you can't be an influencer in a different way, being a really powerful ally is an important thing. So ladies, welcome. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to have you each introduce yourself to the audience this morning. Jude, why don't you go, since at least you're in the middle of the screen there.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jude Denning, and I serve as the pastor and minister and CEO of Unity of Stewart here in Southeast Florida. And I've been here for 6 years. And prior to that, I was 10 years serving a Unity Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I was born and raised in New Jersey. And Reverend Michelle and I met when we were 13. and we have been friends for a very long time. And I'm delighted and happy to be here in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Reverend Georgia.
I too am very happy to be in the conversation. I pastor the Center for Spiritual Awareness, which is an affiliate of the Centers for Spiritual Living in Sacramento, California, and have been doing that for, I founded the church here 23 years ago. Wow. And as you say, I'm very passionate about this issue. And there's a picture of our community. Very passionate about this issue, and am very clear that white people have to be involved in order for us to make meaningful change, although we have to be the students of this issue and not the teachers.
Right. Right. Except to other white people who think that they don't have to pay attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'd like to find out what you're doing in your community, what it has looked like to bring the conversation. I mean, and I know, Georgia, I know enough about you and your community to know that this has been a long time conversation. Things might have gotten exaggerated, but this has been around for a long time with you. So give us a little bit of the history and the programs, because if anything, when we leave here today, I want other people to feel like that they can be in that conversation. Mm-hmm. So tell us about what's been going on.
Well, for us, it is all about conversation. It's all about getting people to talk to each other, to listen to each other. So we actually program conversations around race after Sunday services very often, and we've been doing that for years. We've done a couple on white privilege, which is a tough conversation for some folks to have, and we have a ministry here called Ujima, which is part of the African culture. And that ministry takes the lead in providing programming. We just did a very successful 21-day racial equity challenge. We had 400 people around the country.
Wow.
On it. Yeah, and they stayed with it. It was 10 weeks. I thought maybe it would start to drop off. It didn't.
Right.
So we're very excited about what we're doing. We have a theater group called Authentic Voices that's made up of African American, European American, gay people, straight people, transgender folks, and we just go out and tell our stories and do a little music with it as well, and that's been very successful here. So we do a lot. Now we have a newsletter that we send out called the 21-Day Racial Equity Challenge newsletter. It goes out once a week, and I think you'll probably put that up later so people can get just right to it, and we'll get you on the newsletter. It's very informative. And all of this is done with an intention to not be shaming, because we know many of our folks are they're thirsty, but they're making mistakes. And we all make mistakes. White people make mistakes. And we have very generous-hearted people of the global majority that have been very generous with their forgiveness around the mistakes. So it's, the important thing for us is to keep at it and at it and at it and at it. And not let it be after George Floyd, we all blow up and do something, but that every single month we have something going on. We have a racial film night, a social justice film night that deals mostly with racial issues, sometimes with LGBTQ issues, but that's also been very successful.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Thank you. So I hope some of the listeners, people hearing you now, or that will view the show, many people view the show later, feel to get that spark of, I can do this. Don't
Absolutely.
Don't think you can't do it, because you're going to make a mistake.
Exactly.
But make a mistake and keep going. Please make a mistake and keep going.
Yes.
So those are some impressive numbers. All right. Thank you. Thank you. So Jude, catch us up. And, for me, I always love the way you described described this initially, but I'd love to have you also talk about part of your family and why very specifically this matters to you in a deep and personal way.
So, and first, I bow to you, Georgia. Seriously, bow to you for this work that you're doing. It's incredible work, and thank you, thank you. And before I go further, the words you use, global majority. I first read those words yesterday.
Oh,
Meaning people with black and brown skin are the global majority. And instead of saying black people or whatever, it's global majority. That's very meaningful to me. So thank you for bringing that up. So as Michelle was referring to, I was radicalized by, and the term radicalized might seem a little bit over the top. And yet, when George Floyd was killed, I got my butt into gear. I began to recognize how blind I have allowed myself to be in most of my adult life, how my head has been in the sand, that if it didn't affect me, then I don't have to really pay attention to it. And when George Floyd was killed, and of course, everything we know that happened before and after that, I began to say, okay, it's mine to do. This is mine to do. And so I began to speak in my spiritual community about racial justice. And I started book clubs, book studies. And I started with Ijeoma Oluo's book, So You Want to Talk About Race? And it was the first time many people in my community had ever thought about implicit bias and how we, as white people, we come by it. It's in... I don't want to say it's in the DNA, but it's in our culture, so ingrained in our culture that it's important that we recognize that. And I began to really recognize my white privilege, my white fragility, and white privilege and fragility around me. So I've been doing that, the anti-racist work, and mainly through book clubs and or book studies. And one of the other reasons why this was really important to me is that my middle daughter, who adopted now 2 Black children. And we have been in the conversation about how to raise, as privileged white people, how to raise Black children and keep and do everything that she can and he can to keep their culture at the forefront. And not turn, and these are my words, not hers, not trying to turn Black children into white children culturally. And so she's been doing that good work, and we've had a lot of conversations about that. And it's this whole thing animates me. And so I want to continue to do that work. And Michelle, you might want to talk about mindful of race and healing the divide. You're muted, honey.
Sorry, we had machines going on in the background. I didn't want to overwhelm you before. So yeah, thank you for that lead in. So as a response to George Floyd's murder, we started, same kind of thing. We started having conversations in the community, and we had an initial book study of white fragility for 12 weeks. Mind you, I didn't love that book. And I didn't love the impact. I mean, no, that's not true. It had some good impact. I didn't like the methodology, but that's just my personal thing. We did that for 12 weeks, and then we took a pause, and then we did another Healing the Divide. And what happened was these 2 very beautiful individuals within my community, they put together this program that included music and videos and TED Talks and books and quotes. And it was this lively, very alive, raw discussion from all these different influences. And now in September, at the end of September, Jude, myself, and an individual from an Anton community, her name is Sandy, we are getting ready for the 3rd, which is the Mindful of Race by Ruth King. And if anybody wants to join us on that, I'd be happy if you just contact me through Rev Jersey Girl. And that book I love because it has a different feel from all the others. And I want to comment on 2 things. So Reverend Georgia, you got me in trouble. Many years ago, you had put out a thing on white privilege. It was an informative page. And because you and I were on the commission together, I took that thing and I printed it out and I put it on the table, the information table in my community. Oh my God. Now, not many, but I lost one or two people. And boy, was that conversation hard. And so my recommitment on a regular basis is to stay in the conversation and let those who can't handle it hit the hills, run for the hills, because the conversation has to stay alive. So I'm teasing you, but I thank you for that. It was eye-opening. It was shocking. I was shocked that someone could take offense. I was shocked.
It's hard. And it's hard because I think what happens whenever you say the word privilege with white, people who are having struggles in their life, whatever those struggles are, especially if they're financial, but even if they're not financial, even if there are other kinds of struggles, the immediate reaction is, no, that's not true. That's not true. I'm just struggling and blah, blah, blah. So, it's a tough conversation, and we have to keep going with it and keep them in the room. Our motto is just keep their butt in the seat until we can get through. One of the ways that we did that sheet, you probably remember, is just a list of all the white privilege things that can happen, like followed through the store, that kind of thing. And so we had a circle of white and black people, and I gave it the sheet only to white people, and I skipped the black people. And I asked every time that a white person, and then I asked them to just go around the room and read each one. And I asked the black people if that situation had ever happened to you to please stand. And it was impactful because it's one thing to read a book about somebody so far away, but it's another to find out that the person that you've been in class with, the one you're sitting next to in church on Sunday, was also followed around the store. We have a Harvard-educated PhD, and she tells a wonderful story about being followed around a store here in Sacramento because she was black. Yeah.
And one of my onlookers right now, Donnie Barnes, my beloved Donnie, she has been part of the community for years. And as soon as George Floyd happened, my insides got shaken, and I immediately wrote an article, sent it to the community, and we had a conversation within a day, 2 days, blew out our subscription of Zoom at the time, and the generosity of people like Donnie and a few other people of color in my community that shared so raw. And some of the members of the community were shocked and horrified because you're right. You don't know this person that you love, that you adore, that you call your friend, that until they tell you, you don't know that what they've been through. And so it was revealing beyond revealing. And I'm so grateful because my community is very diverse. Well, diverse. I'd love more, but even last night the board decided to donate money to, I don't remember the name of the organization, and I said to them, take time to appreciate what you just did, because you're putting your money where we say our heart is. So anyway, just that. But it's a hard conversation, and I appreciate also about what you talked about with the shame. And Jude and I have had this conversation, because in order to keep people in the conversation, you have to, if you shame them, they're going to run and close the door and not want to be there.
Right.
And so I'm watching your your heads bowing. So I'm like, okay, so we are in sync. And that's something I feel that some of the authors of some of the books that were out didn't do. I feel like they kept putting lines in the sand. So,
well, and we run into that. I mean, I've got some very radical white people who want to be the best white person in the whole world. And so they tend to be the ones shaming the other white people more than people of color are. And so, yeah, it's a tricky deal, but unless we can keep them in the seats, it won't work. And I tell folks right in the beginning, white people are going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. Other white people are going to make mistakes. If this is a day in which you feel really raw, please excuse yourself from this conversation, because we've got to keep people in the seats.
Right.
And the Ujima ministry here, they know that. They're very good at that. Yeah.
Yeah, that has not always been what I found out there. So I appreciate that. Jude, I mean, you're in a quiet little community down in Unity with a white community.
Pretty much.
So yeah, so tell me, what has been their responses? Tell me what's come about.
The responses are, I move very gently. I speak very gently. There's a certain faction, that's not a great word, but for lack of a better word, there's a certain part of the community that doesn't resonate with this, right? Mm-hmm. So I have to tread. I don't have to do anything, but I tread lightly, because bringing people along gently is the way to go. So I do, I haven't done a whole talk on racial equality, or racial justice. And the book studies that I've done, and even when I do talk about racial equity and racial justice, even peripherally around a Sunday lesson, I get good feedback. So I think that I'm doing it in a way that this community accepts. Mm-hmm. And I'm really looking forward to doing the Mindful of Race with you. And I just want to go back to something that Georgia said about what you talked when you had Black folks and white folks in the room. And if this happened to a Black folks, they would stand up. I came across, this was a resource that my daughter gave me of a Dr. Tiffany Dent on Facebook. It's TYFANNI, Dent, and it's in resources that Reverend Michelle will send you if you email her. She has a video on there. It's called What Dark-Skinned People Will Never Tell You. And it's about those things that you were mentioning, Georgia. So if, those who are watching this want to get that, from the mouths of the people who experience it, go to Facebook and look up Dr. Tiffany Dent and What Dark-Skinned People Will Never Tell You. And it's heartbreaking. And over the years, I've had to force myself, over this year, I've had to force myself to watch things like 13th and to read the 1619 Project and to do all those things, because it's hard. And if it's hard for me, imagine how hard it is for people with Black skin, and to just really stand up and do something and say something and be, even if it's just that voice in the world, that white, privileged, white woman voice in the world that says that this needs to change. Right.
Oh, shoot, I forgot you said something that was really meaningful. Oh, but I do want to tell people, Jude has put together, actually her daughter and Jude put together, Reverend Jude, have put together a whole page of resources. Again, it's just a beginning. But if you want that, I'm happy to send that to you, and just send an email to revjerseygirl@gmail.com, and I will, send you those resources. So
another resource, or an idea for people who are building communities, spiritual communities. You mentioned your daughter. We have on occasion and continue periodically to have mixed race family brunches. And it has actually brought people, and we advertise it on Facebook and other places, and it's actually brought people into the church because folks, again, are thirsty for a safe place for their family, not only to worship, but just to congregate.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I know I know that we have some members that are with us because of our welcoming, and they needed it, and we have a number of families who have adopted children of color, and they needed a place, and And that definitely sensitizes the whole community, because our one young man who actually just turned 18, but when he was 17, and his adopted father said to me, he doesn't want to get a license. And I'm like, oh, and got it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And these are the kind of things that when you're in a mixed race community, you have the advantage of experiencing, especially if you love somebody, right? If you love somebody, you want for them, you know, what is rightfully theirs. So, pieces of advice.
Oh, good.
What would
I have one.
Good.
Show up in Black spaces. Show up at Martin Luther King Day. I have a very small community here in Stuart, Florida, and there's a Black community here, and I showed up on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I was one of very few white people, and just showing up, buying food, seeing where I could spend money in Black businesses. And I showed up downtown as a voice, which I didn't realize I was going to be a voice, but I showed up for the anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And I said a few words. I was in my biking clothes, and I had no idea they were going to ask me to say a few words, but I did. And it's to show up in those spaces, and not as an expert, not as anybody who has anything to tell anybody, but to just be there as a white person in support. Mm-hmm. And so that's my little bit of advice. Join a book group. Start talking, join when we get together and we do Mindful of Race, join that book club, because if you haven't done anything like this before, it will open your eyes to where you are in this and how to move along and how to make those changes in our own implicit bias, and the light will go on.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I love that. Show up. That's a big, and show up and stay in the conversation. Those are clearly two very important pieces.
Yeah.
Georgia, what about you? What would you?
I would reiterate those. That's great advice. I think, show up, be willing to make mistakes. My personal thing is that if a person of color tells me something that's true in their life, I believe them every time. I think that it's important for us to continue to, just show up, set an intention that this is going to change and that you're going to be part of the change.
It's, I brought my, I go to breakfast. This is my favorite little local diner, and I had my Mindful of Race book on the table, and I was getting ready for a meeting that we have weekly, and the waitress said, well, what are you reading? And she was white, and I totally made the assumption, I've been around her a little bit, I totally made her the assumption she wouldn't care, she wasn't really interested. And then upon talking to her about it, found out she was already part of a group in her church. In her church. And I'm like, oh, a white church in Denville, New Jersey. Yes. And then I did talk to her about the book, and I'm going to tell her about Healing the Divide when the time comes. So one of the things I want to say is be, to those listening, be intentional, as Reverend Georgia said, like keep your book on your table, have the conversation, and like with my grandchildren, oh my God, with my grandchildren, I tell people this all the time. My sons, actually, and my grandchildren, the first doll they ever received was from me, and it was always a Black baby doll, because I wanted to immediately normalize the color. I wanted to normalize them being around people. So when I have gatherings, I bring my grandchildren, because in the communities where they are, it's not mixed race, but at least in my community. And now they've come to love these people, and the people, everyone has, and of course loves them. But now I'm helping to normalize it. That's a very important thing for parents and grandparents. It is very important that your children stay around people of color. And it must have had some impact, because when my granddaughter came home from her first swim meet and we were in the car, I was driving her home, she said to me, you know, Nana, there were no black people there. And I went, oh, she noticed. She's 7 and she noticed. Okay, I've started it. I started it.
Yes, you did.
So that's, and for me, and Jude knows because we shared a early spiritual community. My earliest spiritual community was a mix of, white and black and gay and straight and flamboyant and not. And it, to me, it was so normal. I never questioned it. And so I think that, and I want to tell those of you who might not know, parents that might be listening, if you don't know some of the cartoons that your children are watching these days, or cartoons that are available, cartoons are becoming a source of normalizing mixed races and same-sex relationships. Mm-hmm. They are doing a beautiful job. Yep. Beautiful. I applaud what they're doing because it's going to seep in to, underneath. So that's great. So,
and it makes a difference. It just makes, we have a new person working in our summer youth program, and she is the daughter of 2 women. And one of the kids, I overheard him in the hallway saying, she has 2 mommies.
Oops. You froze for a second. I assume you meant 2 mommies just like me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It was great.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Oh God. Thank you, God. And New Jersey isn't an easy community, but I am proud that even my community, which is fairly white, is starting to become more mixed. And there was pride flags all over the place. So I feel better and better about that. So let me ask you both something else. What would you want to leave our audience with? As far as inviting them into some experience, what would you have them dive into? I'll model it, or I'll start just because I know I threw you into that question. One of the things I want to say to everyone listening, especially people, white people, don't expect this to feel good. Don't expect to pat yourself on the back, and don't expect anybody else to pat you on the back. If anything, know that your heart will be rewarded by having a new sense of compassion for the world. But when doing it, know that there are times it's going to be hard. And so it is. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. So that's the one thing. Actually, if you think a little longer, I'll do a commercial because I got so into our conversation and I didn't do our commercial. Please, folks, the conversations that are had on this show and many shows like it are powerful shows of transformation. Give to this community. It's newthoughtmedia.org. Give to this community to keep it alive, to keep the conversation happening, so that the radio station in and of itself becomes an influencer. So with your love and your generosity, support this ministry. So thank you for doing that. Okay, which one of you might be ready?
I'm ready with variety. You said one thing.
Oh, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, so read this book. So you want to talk about, it's a very good first book to read if you're just stepping on the conscious path of racial equity and racial justice. When we read this, some people said, well, she's a little angry. I said, well, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to be faced with your white privilege. So I invite you to read that and then watch some things. That's easy to say, oh, I'm an ally. And for me, it meant that I had to get uncomfortable. So get comfortable with discomfort. As Michelle was intimating before, this is not going to be fun and games. This is work that we are called to do. Read a book, watch a documentary, and, email Michelle if you want to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah. And we're happy to share your emails too. If you want that to happen, we can do that. Because I do have a list somewhere of a lot of movies and TED Talks that are very powerful. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jude. Reverend Georgia.
And you know what? I totally agree. Watch those TED talks, read those books, and don't stop there. Get into conversations where you're actually with other folks, whether it's a mixed group or even if it's an all white group. It's really important for us to be able to verbalize and to hear feedback about where we are in this discussion, knowing that it might hurt. I mean, when we started Authentic Voices, which is this theater group of 8 people of different backgrounds, different races, coming together to tell our stories, we often left and we wrote for a solid year. We would meet every week, and for 2 hours, we would just write and share our writings with each other to get them ready for performance. And more often than not, we would leave in tears. But we came back week after week after week, and we stayed with it. And now we're very bonded and close, and making mistakes isn't the end of the world. But like you say, it's hard work, but the reward is great. We cannot let this continue. You've both talked about the George Floyd incident. My George Floyd incident actually happened about 18 years ago here at the church, when one of our 8-year-olds ran up and asked his mom if he could go home with his new friend that he just met at church that morning. And his mom said, well, did his parent, he asked all the mom questions.
Mm-hmm. You froze for a second again, Georgia. Back up like 2 seconds.
Okay. His mom asked all the mom questions, what are his parents good with that? Or, what time should I pick you up? And then she leaned down and very quietly said to him, but I could overhear it. She said, now remember, if they play out in the front of the house, you cannot run. If they bring any water toys, water guns, or any other little guns, you cannot touch them. And he was 8 years old, and it just broke my heart for him to have to hear that and begin to limit himself. Because, when you hear that when you're a child, what happens is you internalize that. It's in your subconscious. You have a lot of prayer work to get that up and out. So that was my George Floyd moment. And that's what really promoted and prompted me to do the work that I've done here. But it's hard. It's hard work.
So you just reminded me, and by the way, Reverend Dr. David Alexander, the current chair of CSL, and very involved in this conversation, talks about having to have that conversation with his adopted son when one day he was running around outside with a man-made kind of gun, and he said, oh no, this can't happen. Yeah. And it's very sobering. And my community is almost 20 years alive. So I don't remember how long ago, probably 17 years. My third son is half Puerto Rican, and his father is fairly dark skinned. And he was there visiting one day on a Sunday, brought our son to church that day, and then went outside, and he was on a phone call. And the next thing, so this is post-celebration, and the next thing I know is one of the young men ran in from outside and said, the police are outside. The police are outside. They're talking to, Seth's father. So I go out there, and what had happened was there had been a robbery in the neighboring house 2 doors up. And he was the closest available person of color. Mm-hmm. I was so outraged. But what happened was we took that into a moment of inspiration, and we created a beautiful, and I want to support you saying about creativity and acting, Georgia, because there's something that comes out in creativity. So we created something called Eracism. And we had different people who were doing different kinds of dances, and our drummer created 5 different tones, and we had voiceovers from the other room and talking about, it was just this beautiful piece inspired by that. So that was a waking up for our community there, and it's really painful. It's painful. And if you don't understand this pain, if you think that for some reason, we're talking about something that doesn't matter, then you're just too far removed.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Been there.
and
I was
we
that
haven't even
person.
we haven't even talked about brown people and ice.
No.
And
Oh.
that's all in California anyway. It's just a nightmare. It's a total nightmare here. Yeah.
Oh my God. I did go down with William Barber a couple years ago before COVID to El Paso. And that was another thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tough conversations. These are tough, necessary conversations. And it's so easy to dismiss when it's not there in your face.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the point of waking up, having the awareness. So, oh my gosh, yeah, it gets me every time. So, is there anything else that either one of you would like to leave the audience with before we say our goodbyes and leave for the day?
Do something. You can't do it all. You're not an expert, and do something. Ask Reverend Michelle for those resources and take a step and do one thing to further racial equity and equality.
Yeah, and thank you. And then there's Reverend George's program again. Any one of you that want to get on that program, please do. And Reverend Georgia?
Well, I would say the same thing. I would say set your intention that this is going to end, and that you want to be a part of that, and don't let it be lip service. Knowing that oneness means authentic oneness. It doesn't mean sameness.
Oh, it doesn't. You cut out again. It doesn't mean sameness, and
I don't remember. It's sort of like one of the things I had to learn about preaching to a mixed audience is sometimes people will say it again. And I thought they meant it. And I was trying to, what did I just say? What did I just say?
That's funny. And the one last thing I want to add is this is not political.
Right.
Yes, amen.
This is not political.
Right.
This is about humanity. We're all on we're sharing one planet that does not belong to us. So this is not political. Please don't make this political. Please, dear God, because that's a killer of the conversation right there.
Right.
So Jude and Georgia, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. Anyone wants to be in the conversation, Reverend Jude's at Stewart, Unity of Stewart. Reverend Georgia's at the Center for Spiritual Awareness in Sacramento. I'm in New Jersey, of course, the Jersey girl. So you can contact me. And I thank you for your time and attention as an audience today. And I thank Reverend Jude and Georgia. And as I say every week, please stay in the conversation. Be well, be happy. Be brilliant. I love you. Thank you.
I love you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.